Captain Naomi Carter had one hand on the café door when she heard the waitress's voice crack. I'm sorry, sir. It says your card was declined again." The room fell uncomfortably quiet. An elderly man wearing a faded Army veteran cap stared at the payment terminal for a long second before reaching into an old leather wallet. His hands were steady, but the wallet was nearly empty. "There must be some mistake," he said softly. "Try it one more time." The waitress did. She looked up with an apologetic smile. "It still won't go through." A man at the next table sighed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If you can't pay for breakfast, maybe don't order one." A few people looked away, others kept watching. The veteran gave a small nod, folded his wallet shut, and started removing the eggs and toast from his tray as if deciding which item he could afford to return. Captain Naomi Carter watched from across the room. Without saying a word, she stood, walked to the register, slipped her government travel card back into her wallet, and used her personal debit card instead. "Please," she whispered to the cashier, "just tell him everything's taken care of. Don't tell him who paid." Before anyone could stop her, Naomi picked up her duffel bag and stepped outside. She never saw the old veteran slowly turn toward the door just as her truck disappeared onto the highway. 2 weeks later, Major Richard Collins looked across his desk with an expression Naomi had learned to distrust. "Captain Carter," he said evenly, "report to the battalion command office immediately." Naomi frowned. "Sir, is there a problem?" "If there wasn't, you wouldn't be here asking questions." He stood before she could say another word. "And don't keep the colonel waiting." Naomi followed him through headquarters, trying to replay the previous 2 weeks in her mind. She had completed every assignment on schedule, closed out a demanding field exercise, and submitted her quarterly reports early. Nothing stood out. Yet the atmosphere around headquarters immediately felt wrong. 2 lieutenants stopped talking the moment she walked by. A sergeant major glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Even the administrative clerk outside, the command office, seemed unusually nervous as she checked Naomi's name against a visitor list. Major Collins folded his arms. "Interesting," he muttered. "What is, sir?" "Higher headquarters requested your personnel file this morning." Naomi blinked. "My personnel file? They don't usually ask for one without a reason." She searched his face for any hint that he might be joking. There wasn't one. As the clerk stepped away, Collins leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "You know, Captain, some officers never really learn where the line is between compassion and professionalism." Naomi stared at him. "I'm not sure I understand." "I imagine you'll understand soon enough." Before she could ask another question, the command office door opened. "The colonel will see Captain Carter now." Naomi stepped inside. Her commanding officer stood beside his desk, unusually formal. But it wasn't the colonel who caught her attention. An elderly man stood beside the window in a perfectly pressed army dress uniform. 4 silver stars rested on each shoulder. For a heartbeat, Naomi couldn't breathe. She knew that face. The kind eyes. The calm posture. The same man whose breakfast she had quietly paid for outside San Antonio. He turned toward her with a faint smile that carried no anger, no accusation, only recognition. "Captain," he said warmly, "it's good to see you again." Naomi came to attention automatically. "Captain Naomi Carter, reporting as ordered, sir." The elderly general returned the salute with calm precision before lowering his hand. "At ease, Captain." His voice was familiar now that she heard it without the noise of a crowded café. Naomi looked from the general to her commanding officer, then briefly toward Major Collins, who stood near the wall with his arms folded. Collins wore the faint, confident expression of someone expecting events to unfold exactly as he had predicted. Naomi couldn't make sense of any of it. Had she unknowingly violated some regulation? The colonel finally broke the silence. Captain Carter, General Whittaker specifically requested this meeting. Naomi swallowed. Sir, have we met before? The general smiled. I believe we have. Nothing more was said. Instead, the colonel thanked the general for coming and asked if he would mind waiting in the adjoining conference room while a few administrative matters were completed. Of course, Whittaker replied pleasantly. As soon as the door closed behind him, Major Collins looked directly at Naomi. I'd think very carefully about your answers today. Naomi frowned. My answers to what? To whatever you're asked. Before she could press him further, Collins walked out. The memory of that morning outside San Antonio replayed in Naomi's mind with startling clarity. She had stopped at the roadside café after an overnight training exercise, still wearing her Army combat uniform because she planned to drive straight back to Fort Sam Houston. She remembered noticing the elderly veteran before the payment problem even began. He had eaten slowly, thanking the waitress every time she refilled his coffee. When his card failed, another customer immediately offered to cover the meal. The veteran politely shook his head. No, son, I appreciate it, but I'll sort it out. There was dignity in the way he said it. Not pride, just quiet determination. Naomi thought about her grandfather. He had served in Vietnam and spent years teaching her that accepting kindness should never come at the cost of losing your self-respect. Dignity isn't something people give you, he used to say. It's something you carry. That memory guided her decision. Instead of walking over and placing the veteran in an awkward position, she quietly paid the cashier. No announcements, she had whispered. The cashier nodded. I understand. Naomi had left before the veteran even looked toward the register. That had been the end of it. Or so she believed. The following afternoon, Major Collins summoned her to his office. He didn't ask her to sit. I've received an interesting report. Naomi waited. You stopped at a café outside San Antonio 2 weeks ago. Yes, sir. You paid for someone's breakfast. She blinked. Yes, sir. Why? Because he couldn't. Collins stared at her. That's your complete explanation. He was an elderly veteran whose card was declined. So you decided to intervene. I decided someone needed help. Collins slowly walked around his desk. You were traveling in uniform. Yes, sir. You represented the United States Army. I understand that. Do you? His tone hardened. Captain, officers are expected to exercise judgment, not emotion. Naomi kept her voice steady. Sir, I don't believe those are mutually exclusive. Collins's expression tightened. That's exactly the kind of answer I expected. He opened a folder, but angled it away so she couldn't read its contents. You involved yourself in a civilian situation without knowing the full circumstances. I paid for a breakfast. You made an emotional decision. I made a human one. The room fell silent. For several long seconds, Collins simply studied her. Finally, he closed the folder. You're dismissed. Naomi saluted and left, but something about the conversation refused to settle in her mind. It hadn't felt like advice. It had felt like evidence being collected. 2 days later, she discovered she was right. While delivering paperwork to the battalion operations office, Naomi overheard 2 administrative specialists speaking in lowered voices. Major Collins asked for travel records and statements from everyone who stopped at that cafe. Naomi paused just outside the doorway. One of the specialists noticed her and immediately stopped talking. The other quietly gathered the documents into a folder marked with her name before closing it. Naomi continued walking as if she had heard nothing. But every step felt heavier than the last. Travel records, witness statements, a formal file. Someone wasn't asking casual questions anymore. Someone was building a case. But against whom? And for what? The next Monday began like every other leadership briefing. Company commanders, executive officers, and senior staff filed into the battalion conference room carrying notebooks and coffee. Conversations centered on training schedules, maintenance reports, and an upcoming brigade inspection. Captain Naomi Carter took her usual seat halfway down the table. Major Richard Collins entered last. He placed a folder on the podium and scanned the room before speaking. Before we discuss operational matters, I'd like to address something more important. The casual conversations stopped immediately. Collins folded his hands behind his back. Leadership isn't simply about competence, it's about judgment. Several officers nodded. He continued. Recently, I've become concerned that one of our officers has demonstrated a tendency to allow personal emotions to override sound professional decision-making. Naomi felt several heads slowly turn toward her. Collins hadn't said her name. He didn't have to. The Army places officers in positions of trust, he said. Every public action reflects on the institution. Good intentions do not excuse poor judgment. The room grew noticeably quieter. Naomi kept her eyes forward. She understood exactly what he was doing. Captain Daniel Perez finally spoke. Sir, are we discussing a specific incident? Collins gave a measured nod. We are. He opened the folder. While traveling in uniform, an officer involved herself in a civilian financial matter without understanding the circumstances. Perez looked puzzled. You mean paying for someone's breakfast? Collins didn't smile. I mean making emotional decisions that create unnecessary complications. Another officer frowned. I'm not sure I follow. The point, Collins replied, is that officers should think first, not react first. No one challenged him directly, but several officers exchanged uncertain glances. The conversation had shifted from military leadership to Naomi's character, without anyone explicitly saying so. It was a public lesson, and she was its example. The meeting moved on to assignments. When Collins reached the leadership roster for the upcoming joint field exercise, he paused. Captain Carter had originally been scheduled to lead Task Group Bravo. Naomi looked up. After further consideration, that assignment has been transferred to Captain Lewis. The room fell silent again. Captain Lewis looked surprised. Sir, I wasn't expecting. I've made my decision. Naomi knew what the reassignment meant. Task Group Bravo was the battalion's highest-profile leadership role during the exercise. Commanding it would have strengthened her promotion file considerably. No explanation was offered beyond Collins's earlier remarks. She simply wrote the change into her notebook. No protest. No visible reaction. Across the room, several officers avoided looking at her altogether. When the meeting ended, Captain Perez caught up with Naomi outside. Naomi. She stopped. You okay? I've been better. He lowered his voice. I don't think this is really about breakfast. You noticed that too. Perez nodded. I was asked if I'd ever seen you make impulsive decisions. Naomi stared at him. You were interviewed. Last week. What did you say? The truth. And I told them you're one of the most disciplined officers I've worked with. Naomi exhaled slowly. So he's been talking to everyone. It looks that way. Before either of them could continue, a lieutenant colonel from brigade headquarters approached. Captain Carter. Yes, sir. I have a message for you. She stood straighter. Someone at Army leadership specifically requested additional information regarding the roadside café incident. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Army leadership. That's all I was authorized to say. He nodded politely and walked away. Perez watched him disappear down the hallway. What exactly happened at that café? Naomi shook her head. I honestly don't know anymore. For the first time since the incident, doubt crept into her thoughts. Had the elderly veteran complained after she left? Had someone misunderstood what happened? Had she unknowingly embarrassed him? Every possibility seemed worse than the last. Meanwhile, Major Collins appeared almost energized. He crossed paths with Naomi later that afternoon outside battalion headquarters. I hope you're beginning to understand something, Captain. She met his gaze. What would that be, sir? He adjusted the folder under his arm. Careers aren't built on intentions. He paused just long enough for his words to settle. They're built on perception. Then he walked away without another glance. Naomi stood motionless. For the first time in years, she wondered whether her next evaluation had already been written. Just before the duty day ended, the battalion commander's secretary hurried into the operations office. Captain Carter. Yes. The colonel needs you. She immediately headed upstairs. Inside the office, the colonel was standing beside his desk with a phone still in his hand. His expression was impossible to read. Sir. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I've just received a call from outside our chain of command. Naomi waited. You are to report to brigade headquarters tomorrow morning at 800. She hesitated. May I ask why, sir? The colonel slowly shook his head. No. A heavy silence filled the room. That's all I can tell you. Naomi barely slept that night. She replayed every moment at the roadside café, searching for something she might have missed. Had someone taken a photograph? Had she accidentally violated a travel policy? Had the elderly veteran felt insulted when he discovered a stranger had paid his bill? By dawn, she still had no answers. At 7:45 a.m., she parked outside brigade headquarters. The building looked different that morning. Several official vehicles occupied reserved spaces near the entrance. A military police detail stood outside the front doors. Officers wearing unit patches from different commands walked briskly through the lobby. This wasn't the atmosphere surrounding routine counseling. Something important was happening. The receptionist checked Naomi's identification and directed her upstairs. Outside the brigade command suite, she immediately spotted Major Richard Collins. He looked unusually composed. Right on time, Captain, he said. Yes, sir. I hope you're prepared. Naomi searched his expression. For what? I imagine you'll find out shortly. His confidence hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. Whatever meeting had been arranged, Collins clearly believed it would validate everything he had said about her. An aide stepped into the hallway. Captain Carter, Major Collins, General Whittaker will be with you shortly. The words caught Naomi's attention. General Whittaker. The name sounded familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. She and Collins were asked to remain outside the command office. The door closed again. Muted voices drifted through the heavy wood, but none were clear enough to understand. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 20. Neither officer spoke. Collins occasionally glanced at his watch, looking more impatient than concerned. Naomi simply waited. Every unanswered question only deepened the tension. Unable to sit still any longer, Naomi slowly walked toward a display of framed photographs lining the hallway. The display chronicled decades of brigade history. Command ceremonies. Deployments. Award presentations. One photograph near the center stopped her. A much younger Army general stood at a podium receiving the Distinguished Service Medal. 4 silver stars shone on his shoulders. His posture. His eyes. The calm expression. Naomi leaned closer. The nameplate beneath the frame read, General Thomas Whittaker. Commanding General Rhett. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked back at the closed office door. The elderly veteran. The roadside café. The faded service cap. The declined debit card. The quiet smile. The pieces finally locked together. She hadn't helped an ordinary retired soldier. She had unknowingly helped one of the Army's most respected retired leaders. A memory surfaced. After paying the cashier, she had almost turned back. For just a second, she had considered introducing herself. Instead, she remembered her grandfather's words. If you expect thanks, you aren't really giving. So she had walked away. No greeting. No handshake. No recognition. She had never expected to see him again. Now he was inside the brigade commander's office. Waiting. The office door suddenly opened. An aide stepped into the hallway. Captain Carter, Major Collins, the commanding officer will see you now. Collins adjusted his uniform and entered first. Naomi followed. Inside, the brigade commander stood near the conference table. General Thomas Whitaker was already on his feet. Without the worn jacket and faded cap from the café, his presence filled the room. Age had softened his features, but nothing diminished the authority he carried. He looked first at Naomi, then at Collins. No one spoke. Finally, General Whitaker folded his hands behind his back. His voice remained calm, almost conversational. Major Collins. He paused. Before we discuss Captain Carter. Collins straightened confidently. I'd like to discuss something you wrote about leadership. The confidence on Collins's face faltered for the first time. The room remained silent. Major Richard Collins stood with his shoulders squared, but the certainty he had carried into brigade headquarters had begun to fade. General Thomas Whitaker picked up a thin folder from the conference table. I've had the opportunity, he said evenly, to read several leadership evaluations written by you over the past 3 years. Collins nodded cautiously. Yes, sir. Whitaker opened the folder. In one of them, you wrote that effective leaders must demonstrate discipline over emotion. That's correct, sir. You also wrote that compassion can become a liability if it interferes with objective decision-making. Collins answered without hesitation. I stand by that statement. Whitaker closed the folder. I thought you might. He turned toward Naomi. Captain Carter, when you entered that café 2 weeks ago, did you know who I was? No, sir. Did you expect anything in return for paying my breakfast bill? No, sir. Did you wait for me to thank you? No, sir. Why not? Naomi hesitated only briefly. My grandfather taught me that kindness shouldn't place someone else in debt. If I'd stayed, he might have felt obligated to thank me. I didn't want that. Whitaker smiled. And did you tell anyone afterward? No, sir. Not even your chain of command? No, sir. I considered it a private moment. Whitaker nodded slowly. Exactly. He looked around the room at the brigade commander and several senior officers who had quietly assembled for the meeting. After retirement, I travel alone whenever possible. A few officers exchanged surprised glances. I don't announce my rank. I don't ask for special treatment. I don't expect recognition. He paused. I simply observe. No one interrupted. I've learned that the strongest measure of character appears when people believe no reward is possible. He looked back at Naomi. Captain Carter believed I was simply an elderly veteran who couldn't afford breakfast. Naomi lowered her eyes. She never introduced herself. She never asked about my service. She never waited for appreciation. She simply preserved a stranger's dignity and left. Whitaker's voice remained calm, but every word carried weight. That isn't weakness. That's leadership. The brigade commander leaned forward. General, how did you learn Captain Carter's identity? Whitaker answered immediately. I didn't ask anyone to identify her. He glanced toward Naomi. After I discovered my breakfast had been paid for, I thanked the cafe owner. The owner recognized Captain Carter from previous visits by soldiers stationed nearby. Only after I asked whether I could personally thank her did he mention her name. Whitaker rested both hands on the table. I became curious, so I requested permission to review her service record. He turned another page in the folder. What I found concerned me far more than the breakfast. Whitaker looked directly at Major Collins. Captain Carter's operational evaluations are consistently excellent. The brigade commander nodded. They are. Whitaker continued. Mission performance, training readiness, decision-making, mentorship. Every measurable category reflects a highly capable officer. He lifted another document. Yet your narrative comments repeatedly describe her as lacking leadership maturity. Collins shifted his weight. Sir, leadership requires difficult judgments. It does, Whitaker replied. But difficult judgments must still be fair. He placed several evaluations side by side. Your written assessments consistently rated Captain Carter below officers whose measurable performance was lower. The brigade commander quietly reviewed the documents. His expression hardened. Whitaker continued. The breakfast incident wasn't the cause of your opinion. It merely confirmed a conclusion you had already reached. Collins finally spoke. Sir, I believed emotional decisions could compromise command. Whitaker answered immediately. And what emotional decision did Captain Carter make? She involved herself in a civilian financial matter. She paid for breakfast. Yes, sir. Whitaker stepped closer. Did she embarrass the veteran? No, sir. Did she announce herself? No, sir. Did she seek recognition? No, sir. Did she violate any Army regulation? Collins hesitated. No, sir. Whitaker let the silence settle over the room. Then, what exactly was the failure? Collins had no answer. The brigade commander closed the evaluation file. Major Collins. Sir. Effective immediately, you are relieved of supervisory responsibility pending a formal command review. The words landed heavily. You will surrender evaluation authority until that review is complete. Collins stood motionless. Yes, sir. Another officer stepped forward. We'll coordinate the transition this afternoon. For the first time since Naomi had known him, Collins had nothing to say. The authority he had used to shape careers had disappeared in a matter of seconds. The brigade commander turned toward Naomi. Captain Carter. Sir. Task Group Bravo is restored to your command. Naomi blinked. Thank you, sir. Additionally, the commander continued, your promotion file will be reviewed using corrected evaluations. She drew a slow breath. I appreciate the opportunity, sir. Whitaker smiled. I have one recommendation of my own. Everyone looked toward him. I'd like Captain Carter nominated for the Army's Advanced Leader Development Program. The brigade commander nodded immediately. I believe that's entirely appropriate. Naomi was momentarily speechless. She had walked into the building expecting to defend herself. Instead, she was being trusted with greater responsibility. Before leaving, Whitaker approached her privately. I owe you a proper thank you. Naomi smiled gently. Sir, you really don't. He chuckled. I thought you might say that. He extended his hand. This time, allow an old soldier the privilege. Naomi shook it firmly. It was an honor to meet you, General. The honor, Whitaker replied, was mine. Months later, Captain Naomi Carter stood in front of her own company formation as its newly appointed commander. Her office door remained open. Young officers knew they could ask questions without fear of being dismissed. Senior non-commissioned officers knew their experience would be heard. Respect flowed in every direction. not because she demanded it, because she practiced it. One Saturday morning, while stopping at a small diner near Post, Naomi noticed a young lieutenant quietly speaking with a cashier. An elderly veteran sat alone near the window, looking embarrassed as he searched through his wallet. The lieutenant discreetly paid the bill. He never walked over to the table. He simply picked up his coffee and left. Naomi watched through the window as the veteran looked around, confused about who had helped him. She smiled to herself. She never introduced herself to the lieutenant. Some lessons didn't need speeches. They only needed examples. As she walked back to her truck, she remembered her grandfather's words and finally understood them completely. The smallest act done without an audience had become the strongest testimony to the leader she had always hoped to be.